His mother's death left him shattered, and I swore I'd do everything to keep him safe. But somewhere along the way, I blurred the lines between love and obsession. The night I saw him asleep on the couch, something inside me changed, a moment that haunts me to this day. How did I let it come to this? How did I fail him so completely? My name is Sarah Collins. Growing up in a small town with two older brothers, I was always the one who held the family together. Whether it was mediating their endless fights or supporting my parents through tough times, I found purpose in being the reliable one. That instinct to nurture and fix carried me through life, shaping my career as a therapist. But nothing could prepare me for the responsibility I took on after tragedy struck. My sister, Lauren, was my best friend and the heart of our family. Her son, Ethan, was her pride and joy, a sweet, thoughtful boy with a love for soccer and sketching comic book characters. They were inseparable. But one rainy night, on her way home from work, Lauren's life was cut short by a reckless driver. Ethan was just 13 years old when he lost his mother. The call came late at night. I remember gripping the phone as my world tilted. Lauren didn't make it, my brother Mark's voice cracked on the other end. I rushed to their home, where Ethan sat motionless on the living room couch, his eyes fixed on the door as if waiting for her to walk through. When I told him she was gone, his silent tears shattered me. Without a second thought, I became Ethan's guardian. I wanted to shield him from the storm, to ensure he felt loved and safe. At first, it felt manageable, driving him to practice, helping with schoolwork, cooking his favorite meals. But as time passed, I became more than just an aunt. I became his everything. Ethan clung to me in his grief, and I clung to him, desperate to keep him afloat. "You're all I have now, Aunt Sarah," he whispered one night, and those words cemented my determination to never let him feel abandoned. But the tighter I held on to him, the more I blurred the boundaries between what he needed and what I needed. Looking back now, I realize how much I depended on Ethan to fill the void in my life. I thought I was saving him, but maybe, in some ways, I was saving myself. And in doing so, I set us both on a path I wish I could undo. As Ethan entered his teenage years, subtle changes began to surface. At first, they seemed like the natural shifts of a boy growing up, shutting his bedroom door, spending more time on his phone, and pulling away from hugs he once welcomed. But soon, those changes began to feel like something deeper, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Ethan had always been quiet, but now his silence carried an edge, a tension that hadn't been there before. I noticed how he avoided my gaze during conversations, offering one-word answers to questions that once sparked excited chatter. He stopped talking about his friends and began spending hours alone, sketching in his room. His drawings grew darker, filled with jagged shapes and stormy skies. One evening, after dinner, I caught a glimpse of his phone screen. A message from someone named Sienna flashed briefly before he quickly locked the device. "Who's Sienna?" I asked casually, but my tone betrayed the unease I felt. His shoulders stiffened, and without looking up, he muttered, "Just a friend from school." It was a harmless answer, yet it gnawed at me. Why didn't he want to share more? Had I done something to make him feel he couldn't trust me? I found myself overanalyzing every interaction, searching for clues to explain the growing distance between us. The tension deepened when his grades started slipping. Ethan had always been a straight-A student, but now his teachers were calling to express their concerns. "He's distracted," his math teacher said during a parent-teacher conference. "It's like he's here, but his mind is somewhere else." I tried to talk to Ethan about it one evening, hoping to understand what was going on. "Is everything okay at school?" I asked, sitting on the edge of his bed. He shrugged, his eyes glued to the sketchbook in his lap. "I'm fine," he said flatly, flipping to a blank page. I pressed further. "You can tell me if something's bothering you, Ethan. I'm here to help." He sighed, setting the sketchbook aside. "You don't need to worry about me so much, Aunt Sarah," he said, his voice carrying a trace of annoyance. "I'm not a little kid anymore." The words stung, but I brushed them off, telling myself it was just a phase. Deep down, though, I felt the cracks in our relationship widening. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something from me, something that might explain his sudden withdrawal. One night, I overheard Ethan talking on the phone. His voice was low, almost inaudible, but the urgency in his tone was unmistakable. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but it left me unsettled. Was he confiding in someone else? Was there something he felt he couldn't tell me? The next day, I found myself standing outside his room, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I hesitated, torn between respecting his privacy and my growing desperation to understand what was going on. Finally, I knocked softly and waited. When there was no response, I pushed the door open. Ethan was sitting at his desk, his back to me, headphones on. He didn't hear me enter. On his desk, I noticed a crumpled piece of paper covered in scribbled words and dark sketches. My heart sank as I picked it up, scanning the fragmented sentences. Can't escape, it's too much, and she doesn't see what's happening. I froze, a chill running down my spine. Was he talking about me? Had my constant hovering, my need to protect him, pushed him to a breaking point? I carefully placed the paper back where I found it and left the room, my mind racing. For the first time, I questioned everything. Was I helping Ethan heal, or was I suffocating him with my love? The lines between caring and controlling had become so blurred, I no longer knew where one ended and the other began. The shift was gradual, almost imperceptible at first. Ethan had always been affectionate in his own way, a quick hug, a pat on the shoulder, a heartfelt thank you when I helped him through something. But now, those moments began to feel different. Or perhaps it was me who had changed. It started one evening as we were watching a movie. Ethan had been quiet all day, his usual tension replaced by a subdued stillness. I thought maybe he was just tired, so I invited him to sit with me in the living room. He hesitated before eventually settling onto the couch beside me, closer than usual. As the movie played, I felt his head lean against my shoulder. It wasn't unusual, he'd done it countless times as a child, but this time, something about the weight of it, the warmth of his presence, made my breath catch. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was overthinking a harmless moment. But the pounding of my heart suggested otherwise. Over the next few weeks, these moments began to multiply. A lingering touch on his arm when I passed him a plate at dinner. The way his gaze seemed to linger on me during conversations. And then there was the night it all came to a head. Ethan had just come home from soccer practice, his hair damp with sweat and his cheeks flushed from exertion. He tossed his bag onto the floor and plopped down at the kitchen table, recounting the game with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen in weeks. I smiled, grateful to see a glimpse of the boy I used to know. "You should have seen it," he said, his eyes lighting up as he described his teammate's winning goal. "It was perfect." As I handed him a glass of water, our hands brushed. It was such a small thing, so innocent, yet it sent a jolt through me. I pulled my hand back quickly, but he noticed. His smile faltered, replaced by a look of confusion and something else I couldn't quite place. "You okay, Aunt Sarah?" he asked, his voice soft but probing. "I'm fine," I replied, forcing a laugh. "Just tired." But I wasn't fine. That brief touch had stirred something in me, something I didn't want to acknowledge. I spent the rest of the evening avoiding his gaze, retreating to my room the moment dinner was over. The tension between us grew after that. It was as if we were both aware of an unspoken shift, but neither of us knew how to address it. I found myself hyper-aware of his presence, his voice, his movements, the way his smile could light up a room. And then came the night that changed everything. Ethan had stayed up late working on a school project, and I found him asleep on the couch, his sketches scattered around him. I approached quietly, intending to drape a blanket over him and turn off the lights. But as I stood there, looking down at him, I felt an inexplicable pull. His hair was tousled, his face peaceful in a way that seemed to erase all the tension of the past few weeks. I reached out, my hand hovering over his shoulder, and froze. What was I doing? This was Ethan, my nephew, the boy I had raised as my own since his mother's death. And yet, in that moment, he didn't feel like a child. He felt like someone I didn't quite recognize. I pulled back, my chest tightening with guilt and confusion. But the moment lingered, haunting me long after I had left the room. The next day, Ethan seemed to sense that something was off. "Are you okay?" he asked as we sat down for breakfast. His eyes searched mine, filled with concern. "I'm fine," I lied, offering a forced smile. Just a lot on my mind. He nodded, but I could tell he didn't believe me. And the truth was, I didn't believe myself either. I was caught in a whirlwind of emotions I didn't understand, and it was beginning to unravel me. Things came to a head one afternoon when Ethan came home early from school. I was in the kitchen, tidying up, when he walked in and leaned against the counter, watching me silently. "What's on your mind?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "You," he said simply. I froze, my heart pounding. "What do you mean?" "You've been acting weird lately," he said, his tone gentle but insistent. "Like you're avoiding me or something. Did I do something wrong?" "No, Ethan," I said quickly, my voice trembling. "You didn't do anything wrong." "Then what is it?" he pressed, stepping closer. "Because I can feel it too. Something's different." I opened my mouth to respond but found myself at a loss for words. He was right, something was different. And the fact that he had noticed only made it harder to deny. The storm outside mirrored the chaos inside me. Rain lashed against the windows as I sat in the dimly lit living room, the soft hum of the television providing a fragile sense of normalcy. Ethan had been unusually quiet that evening, retreating to his room right after dinner. I told myself it was nothing, just another mood swing typical of teenagers. But deep down, I knew better. I had been teetering on the edge of something for weeks, my emotions a tangled mess of guilt, confusion, and longing. Every interaction with Ethan felt like walking a tightrope, my mind constantly battling against feelings I couldn't control. I wanted to believe I was strong enough to fix things, to steer us back onto safer ground. But the truth was, I didn't even know where to begin. Around midnight, I heard the creak of floorboards upstairs. Moments later, Ethan appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He hesitated before stepping into the room, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his hoodie. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. I nodded, motioning for him to sit. He chose the armchair across from me, creating a distance that felt both necessary and painful. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the rain pounding against the roof. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "I need to say something, and I don't know how to start," he began, his voice steady but strained. My heart clenched. "You can tell me anything, Ethan," I said, my own voice barely above a whisper. He looked away, his jaw tightening. "It's just, I've been feeling weird about us. Like something's not right." I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. "What do you mean?" I asked cautiously. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know how to explain it. It's like, I feel like I can't say no to you. Like I don't have a choice." The weight of his words hit me like a freight train. My mind raced, replaying every moment we had shared over the past few months. The touches, the glances, the unspoken tension, it all came rushing back with a clarity that made me feel sick. "Ethan, I never meant to make you feel that way," I said, my voice trembling. I've been trying so hard to be there for you, to fill the void your mom left. Maybe I've gone too far." His gaze snapped back to mine, his eyes filled with a mix of hurt and anger. "You think," he said, his voice rising. "You've been treating me like I'm the only thing that matters, and it's suffocating. I don't even know who I am anymore." Tears welled up in my eyes as his words sank in. "I'm so sorry, Ethan. I didn't realize." "No, you didn't," he interrupted, his tone sharp. "And the worst part is, I let it happen because I didn't want to lose you. But I can't do this anymore." The room fell silent, the sound of the rain now deafening. I wanted to say something, anything, to make it better. But no words came. I had spent so much time convincing myself that my actions were out of love, that I was helping Ethan heal. But now, faced with the raw truth, I couldn't deny the damage I had done. Ethan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I need some space," he said, his voice breaking. "I can't figure things out with you hovering over me all the time." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "I understand," I whispered. "Take all the time you need." As he turned to leave, I felt a pang of desperation. "Ethan, wait," I called out. He paused, glancing over his shoulder. I just want you to know that I love you. No matter what, I'll always love you. He didn't respond, his expression unreadable, before disappearing up the stairs. The sound of his door closing echoed through the house, leaving me alone with my guilt and regret. In the days that followed, the distance between us grew. Ethan spent more time out of the house, often with his friend Ryan, whose name I had only recently learned. When he was home, he kept to his room, avoiding me as much as possible. I tried to respect his need for space, but it was excruciating. Every time I passed his closed door, I felt the weight of my mistakes crushing me. One evening, I found a letter on the kitchen counter with my name scrawled on the front. My hands shook as I opened it, recognizing Ethan's handwriting. Aunt Sarah, I need you to know that I'm not angry at you. I know you were trying to help me, and I appreciate everything you've done. But I also need to figure out who I am without you constantly stepping in. I hope you can understand that. I'm staying with Ryan's family for a while. I think it's what's best for both of us. Please don't take this the wrong way, I just need time to breathe. Ethan. I clutched the letter to my chest, tears streaming down my face. I had lost him, at least for now. And I had no one to blame but myself. The silence in the house was unbearable after Ethan left. The echoes of his laughter, the creak of his door opening and closing, the quiet sound of his pencil scratching against paper, all of it was gone, replaced by a suffocating stillness. I found myself wandering through the empty rooms, searching for traces of him, but all I found were reminders of the boundaries I had crossed and the damage I had caused. I reread Ethan's letter countless times, each word cutting deeper than the last. I need to figure out who I am without you constantly stepping in. Those words echoed in my mind, a painful reminder of how much I had failed him. I thought I was protecting him, guiding him, but instead, I had smothered him, leaving no room for him to grow. In the first few days after he left, I threw myself into distractions, cleaning the house, organizing cabinets, even volunteering for extra shifts at work. But no matter how much I tried to busy myself, the ache of his absence was always there, gnawing at me. Nights were the worst. I would lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the look on his face the last time we spoke. The guilt was overwhelming. I replayed every moment, every decision, wondering where I had gone wrong. How had I let my love for Ethan become so twisted? How had I convinced myself that my actions were justified? I couldn't escape the truth. I had betrayed his trust in the worst way possible. I reached out to my closest friend, Emily, someone I had known since college and who had always been a voice of reason in my life. Over coffee one afternoon, I broke down, telling her everything, the blurred boundaries, the unspoken feelings, the way I had let things spiral out of control. Emily listened quietly, her expression a mix of shock and concern. When I finished, she took a deep breath and said, "Sarah, you need to get help. This isn't something you can fix on your own. You've hurt Ethan, but you've also hurt yourself. If you don't address this now, it will only get worse." Her words stung, but I knew she was right. I couldn't undo the past, but I could take steps to ensure I never repeated those mistakes. The next day, I made an appointment with a therapist, a small but significant step toward healing. Meanwhile, I tried to respect Ethan's need for space, resisting the urge to call or text him. I wanted to reach out, to apologize, to beg for another chance. But I knew that would only make things worse. He needed time to process everything, and I had to give that to him, no matter how much it hurt. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, I began to piece myself back together. Therapy forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about myself, the loneliness I had buried, the need for control that had driven my actions, and the deep-seated fear of being abandoned. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. For the first time in years, I was learning how to let go. One afternoon, as I was tidying up the house, I came across a box of Ethan's belongings, a soccer jersey, a few sketches, and a framed photo of him with Lauren, his mom. I sat on the floor, holding the photo in my hands, and for the first time, I allowed myself to grieve. Not just for Lauren, but for the relationship I had destroyed with Ethan. Tears streamed down my face as I whispered, "I'm so sorry, Ethan. I hope someday you can forgive me." Then, one evening, months after he had left, there was a knock at the door. My heart raced as I opened it, and there he was, taller, older, and more distant than I remembered. He stood there for a moment, his hands stuffed in his pockets, before finally saying, "Can we talk?" I stepped aside to let him in, my throat tight with emotion. We sat in the living room, the same place where everything had fallen apart, and for a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "I'm not sure if I'm ready to forgive you," he said, his voice steady but laced with pain. "But I needed to see you. I needed to tell you that I'm trying to move on." "I understand," I said, my voice barely audible. "I just want you to know how sorry I am, Ethan. For everything. I never meant to hurt you." He nodded, his eyes filled with a mix of sadness and determination. "I know. But that doesn't change what happened." We talked for hours that night about the mistakes we both made, the pain we had caused each other, and the long road ahead. It wasn't a resolution, not really, but it was a start. A fragile, tentative step toward healing. As Ethan left that evening, he turned back and said, "I don't know if things can ever go back to the way they were. But maybe we can find a new way forward." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "Take all the time you need," I said. "I'll be here." Life after Ethan's departure was quieter, but it was far from peaceful. Each day was a battle with guilt, with regret, and with the overwhelming urge to fix what I had broken. But I knew that healing wouldn't come from clinging to the past, it would come from understanding how I had failed and making the changes needed to move forward. Therapy became my sanctuary. Through countless sessions, I began to unpack the reasons behind my actions, the loneliness I had ignored for years, the fear of losing another loved one after Lauren's death, and the unhealthy ways I had tried to fill the void. I learned that my intentions, no matter how well-meaning, had blinded me to the boundaries I should never have crossed. One of the hardest lessons I had to accept was that love alone isn't enough. Love without respect, without understanding, without boundaries, it can cause just as much harm as hate. I had wanted so desperately to protect Ethan, to make him feel safe, that I hadn't realized how much I was suffocating him. My love had become a cage, and I had trapped us both inside. Months passed before Ethan and I saw each other again. In that time, I focused on rebuilding my life. I reconnected with old friends, pursued hobbies I had long neglected, and, most importantly, worked on finding my identity outside of being Ethan's caretaker. It was a slow and often painful process, but it was also liberating. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly living for myself. When Ethan finally reached out, it was through a text message. "Can we meet?" My heart raced as I replied, "Of course. Whenever you're ready." We agreed to meet at a cafe near his school, a neutral space where we could talk without the weight of the past pressing down on us. Seeing him again was bittersweet. He looked older, more self-assured, but there was still a vulnerability in his eyes that reminded me of the boy I had once tried so hard to protect. We talked for hours, not about the past but about the present, his plans for college, his new friends, his love for sketching that had blossomed into a passion for graphic design. As we said our goodbyes that day, Ethan said something that stayed with me. "I think I'm finally starting to figure out who I am. And I think you're doing the same." His words were a gift, a reminder that even in the aftermath of our mistakes, growth is possible. Looking back now, I realize that our story isn't just one of pain and betrayal. It's also a story of resilience, of learning to face the darkest parts of ourselves and choosing to do better. I'll always carry the weight of what happened between Ethan and me, but I no longer let it define me. Instead, I let it guide me, reminding me of the importance of boundaries, accountability, and self-awareness. If there's one lesson I've learned through all of this, it's that healing doesn't come from erasing the past, it comes from confronting it. From taking responsibility for our actions, no matter how difficult or painful that may be. And most importantly, from allowing the people we've hurt to heal in their own time and in their own way. As I write this, I know our journey isn't over. There will be more conversations, more moments of discomfort, and hopefully, more steps toward reconciliation. But for now, I'm grateful for the progress we've made. Grateful for the chance to rebuild, no matter how slowly. To anyone reading this, I offer one piece of advice. Love the people in your life fiercely, but love them wisely. Respect their boundaries, honor their autonomy, and never lose sight of the line between care and control. Because once that line is crossed, the road back is longer and harder than you can imagine. If you've ever faced a moment where love and boundaries blurred, share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and perspectives can help others learn and grow. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories that delve into life's most complex emotions. Together, we can create a space for healing, understanding, and meaningful conversations. Thank you for being a part of this journey.